Welcome to Teach, Learn, Share, a podcast that thoughtfully explores teaching and learning practices in higher ed. I'm Jasmine Parra, an educational development and digital learning designer.
My name is Adam Finkelstein. I'm the Associate Director for Learning Environments here at Teaching and Academic Programs, and have been part of the podcast with Jasmine here from our first episode, and really looking forward to our next episode here that we have today.
Thanks, Adam. So this podcast is brought to you by Teaching and Academic Programs at McGill University, also known as TAP. We're recording today from Montreal, Quebec, on unceded land, which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe nations. We honor their stewardship as we live and work on these lands. So welcome back, everybody, to another episode of our fifth series of the podcast. This fifth series is called Teaching in the Era of Gen AI. So as we know, Gen AI is showing up everywhere these days, and classrooms in a university setting are no exception. We've kicked off this series with a conversation between Adam and I discussing important considerations to make when thinking about Gen AI in teaching and learning. What are some of the highlights that came from that episode, Adam?
Well, one of the most important things I think we talked about in that episode was the idea of being intentional. And ensuring that whatever you decide to do as an instructor, just make that an informed and aware decision. If you want to not use AI, that's not a problem. If you want to use AI, that's not a problem. But at least make that decision. What we don't want to get into is a scenario where people try to avoid it or pretend that it doesn't exist, because that's definitely not going to be a recipe for success. But I think what we're hoping to do in this episode and a number of others is talk to instructors that have really done some really interesting things in designing AI to their classes, to give people some ideas about how you can be intentional and get success from that with your students.
Absolutely. And at McGill, we've started to see instructors experimenting with these ways of weaving or designing AI into their teaching, not just as a tool of efficiency, but as a part of the learning process itself. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking with one instructor who's been very intentional with how they've designed AI into their course, into their assessments. We'll use this episode to explore how the assessment came together, why it made sense for that particular course, and what it's been like for students to engage with it. So today we're welcoming McGill instructor William Archambault to the show. William is from the Ingram School of Nursing and has recently begun to experiment with designing AI into his assessments. Before diving into describing the assessment itself, William, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your teaching at McGill. It would also be helpful to give us kind of some context of your course, number of students, year of study that they're generally in, things like this.
Perfect. Good afternoon to you both, and thanks for having me on the podcast. So as you introduced, Jasmine, so I teach at the Ingram School of Nursing. I'm a faculty lecturer there. Started teaching since 2017, and I basically teach the large science courses in the nursing school. So that includes a first-year course in pathophysiology and then a second-year course in pharmacology. Both of these courses span 2 semesters, so I actually see the same students for 4 semesters in a row because those courses are mandatory in the program. We also, since 2020, have started a online cohort, so basically an online version of those courses. So there used to be 2 cohorts, one in person, one online for each course. And since fall 2025, now those cohorts are actually cross-listed under the same roof. So it's a large classroom of totaling 300 plus 350-ish almost this year for either course. So total 700-ish students.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty big class. A lot of students you're dealing with. So let's dive into the assignment that you've designed AI into. Can you describe the assignment and kind of how Gen AI fits in there?
Yeah, so basically this same assessment applies for all the courses we teach. Obviously, just the questions will differ in each course, but throughout the semester, they will do 5 what we call mini tests. In a regular mini test, there are 4 questions that we call short written answer questions. Short written answer meaning that it's not just a single word or a phrase. They might have to write like 1, 2, 3 sentences to basically explain the rationale a little bit. In the past, what we used to do is actually we would ask students a question, explain the mechanism of action of this drug, and then they'd have to answer it. Now what we've integrated is the AI component. Instead of asking the student to answer that question, we basically took our exam question, put it into a generative AI tool, and then we're taking the output of that Gen AI tool to the same question, say, what is the mechanism of action of this drug? And then whatever the generative AI tool says, then the students have to analyze and criticize the answer, saying, which parts are correct, which parts are incorrect. Are there missing information that would be relevant? Are there information that is superfluous? We know that a lot of Gen AI tools, sometimes they blah, blah too much, which to me would be akin as if it was a multiple choice exam. It would be like if a student circled many bubbles and then said the answer isn't here. Well, yes, but you also have, useless information. So they also have to parse out those things.
What motivated you to change up this assignment?
Yeah, so it stemmed from, I would say, two major factors. So one would be like I alluded to, the fact that we have now had an online cohort to the course, which led to having the need for more remote and a bit more frequent assessments. So already we had to reassess how we were doing things, compared to when the course was just done in person. Mixed with, we all have that, moment where in the world ChatGPT came out and then other Gen AI tools came out. And then playing with them, we started realizing that, they're not perfect, but they're getting better every day. So it was getting more and more possible for students to simply, pass courses, not just pass a course, but even get A's by inputting questions in those Gen AI tools and then submitting that. So because those tools are becoming part of our lives, we started brainstorming. I say we because I also co-teach those courses with colleagues. We started brainstorming, what would be a good way to integrate those tools. So partly into responding to, okay, well, we can't just ask questions to answer those questions out, but also, okay, how can we at the same time prepare students to use those tools in their future career or just as everyday citizens?
Yeah, it's wild how fast things changed after ChatGPT 3 dropped. And I think we all had that, oh my gosh, moment. But it sounds like you turned that disruption into a teaching opportunity. And I really appreciate you highlighting the importance of preparing students to use these tools, not just in their careers, but as everyday citizens too. And I think one of the most important parts of using Gen AI responsibly is being able to validate its output, being able to check whether it's actually responding to the question that you asked. And, to do that, you really have to have a solid understanding of the underlying content as well. So you just started running this new assignment in this term, and you've given 2 of the 5 quizzes so far. So how's it been going? What's been working well so far?
Yeah, so it is very fresh. So still very much in the early phases, iterating. So I expect things to evolve over time. Actually, one of my first concern I had was, oh, shoot, like what if it's always, by it, I mean like the Gen AI tool, what if it's always fully correct? Or what if it's always fully wrong, right? And then there's no diversity and basically the students don't need to criticize that much. So I had that concern at first. Turns out it was fine. There's good diversity. Sometimes it's completely right. Sometimes it's wrong. Most of the time, it's a mix of both. It has some partial right answer, partial wrong answer. So that gave us a good diversity of outputs for students to criticize. So that was something that worked out well finally. Also, kind of like formulating the question to really, because criticizing, I know it's also quite vague, but we also need, with such a large number of students, we need to make it that it's manageable to be able to grade them and have a kind of like a rubric that is fair and equitable for all students. So we want to keep it open mind, but at the same time, grade them on similar things. So we were concerned if our instructions are going to be clear enough, and turns out that yes, because the success rate was more than sufficient. So I would say those were 2 concerns I had before, but turns out that it worked out fine.
What's interesting is you went from, so the assignment before where the students were answering the questions to now the students are evaluating the actual answers of questions, which actually moves it up significantly in sort of the Bloom's taxonomy. So from being sort of a little bit more lower level, I don't want to use the word, but a lower level task of just answering to now like being able to evaluate actually the answers that they're receiving. So I'm just curious as to how you saw, when you made that jump, is how did the students react to that? Like, did they feel that they felt that they knew enough to be able to do that kind of higher level thinking? And did you do anything to help them get to that, or just kind of threw them in and kept going with it?
Yeah, absolutely agree. This was a jump up that people are familiar with the Bloom's taxonomy. To be completely transparent here, in that mini test, we have 4 questions. 2 of them are those AI questions. The other 2 remain kind of that older style where the students just directly answer the question, because we feel like it's still important for them to be able to generate their own answers as well. So now there's a mix of that, but definitely it creates a difference in the level. And in terms of the preparation, that's something I would say that's been a bit tricky, in the sense that because we have 5 of those quizzes throughout the term, they tend to come quite quickly. So already 2 weeks into the semester, they have their first one. And especially for the first year course, the pathophysiology, the vast majority of those students, it's their first semester of university. So they already have just the adaptation to university. So I would suggest, if are any instructors in a similar situation looking for that, one thing we did to try to mitigate the impact it would have is that of those 5 quizzes they have to do in the semester, we actually drop the worst one. So in case the first one could almost become like a practice run for them. But if they actually do well, maybe not, and maybe it's a later one, right? So only their top 4 of those 5 will count. So that gives you like a little bit of a leeway there. We also gave students a couple of practice examples of questions for them. But because it's the first time we're doing this, we didn't have that many. So that's something we're probably going to try to increase it over time. Another tricky thing I would say was, as you pointed out, Adam, the climb in the Bloom's taxonomy. Now we had to reevaluate how much time do we allocate for that, because analyzing and criticizing a question takes a bit more time. So that calculation here, that's actually one thing we actually adjusted between the first and the second quiz. We actually increased a little bit the time, because that was one of the reactions of the students. We actually have a feedback box in the quiz on my courses for them to put their impressions there. And the overwhelming majority said like they felt pressured for time. Interestingly, despite most of them saying that, the average of that quiz was actually one of the highest we ever had. So showing that the time pressure actually didn't impede on their performance, but still the idea is for them to have enough time to analyze. So we still jumped up the time a little bit for the second iteration. And then most students said, yes, okay, that's now more appropriate. Many of them mentioned that they didn't like it the first time, but now the second time with more time to analyze the questions, they reported understanding a bit more why we're introducing those questions. But there's still some students who really don't like it, but in part because they say they don't like AI and they don't like being reminded of it, which I thought was really interesting there. So I would say those are the early reactions we had.
What sort of things? I mean, I think that's one thing that a lot of instructors are very concerned about, that students are shortcutting the learning process by like trying to jump a few steps ahead, when instead of taking the time to maybe think that through, just go right to the answer. And even if you've got a sophisticated question, like come up with some ideas of criticizing this, they could still go the route so what are you sort of doing to mitigate that kind of issue about like how do we make sure our students are not shortcutting their way through learning as much as possible?
Yeah. Well, with this assignment, I'll stick to this assignment, which, one of the challenges that it's done remotely on their own time. So there's minimal supervision there. So it has to be within the design. Another thing we've done is that we're asking students to cite course content from which they took the answer. So that we try to make it really course specific. And also in our question, for example, we tell them to stick to the course content, in the sense, like an example would be that very often those Gen AI tools, they tend to say more than necessary. Sometimes they say things that are true, but we didn't cover in the course. I want my students to flag that. The reason is that if they haven't seen it in a course, that probably means they would have to go validate this somewhere else. They can't really validate it just use. So it's important for them to flag that, oh, this part here, it sounds true, but we didn't cover this, hence I would have to validate. So that would be part of what I would expect them to notice. You know, if they followed the course content, they would know we never talked about this, right? It's nowhere in my slides, in the textbook or anything. So sometimes we catch students saying, oh yeah, this part is correct. But I'm like, yeah, but we've never talked about this. How do you know it's correct? Right. So that's something else we've integrated to try to really center it on the content of the course for students. Yeah.
Can you talk about, and this is, I'm asking because it came up in a consultation I had recently, what the citation exactly looks like when they are referring to course content?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jasmine. It is true that it's not the same. Like we do tell them, like we're not expecting an APA citation or a Chicago style, whatever, because we want to keep it simple. So we did show students, just like at the beginning, we've shared examples of those questions with them. We've also shared what we expect in terms of course citation. I even showed them an example of how to do it. So I don't like. There's different possibilities for them. I'd have to go into the weeds of how the course looks like on my course a little bit, but basically they can just cite like on this, module 5, because our course has 10 modules in them. So module 5, the title of the web page, and then the number of the slide. Just if they just put that, it tells me they know exactly where this is, right? So that's sufficient. Or if they've used the textbook, because obviously the fact that it's remote and there's no invigilation, we make it open book. So if they use the textbook, just tell us the page in the textbook. It's easy for us to go check if that's even related to the question or not. So just that is sufficient. Just textbook page 506 or something, right? That's fine.
Okay, so it's a little more informal and it's not like a formal APA citation. That's good to know, because then they could be referencing your slides, something that was said in class, recording. It's not just referencing actual research that you talk about in class. Okay, good to know. I do have a question before we kind of move on to some of the wrap up, more general about your course. What's like your kind of communication strategy when it comes to Gen AI? In our first episode, we talked about one of the most important things is communicating how AI is going to be allowed or not allowed in a course, and then being very transparent with your own use as an instructor. So what is your general kind of principle and approach to that in this course?
Since 2023, I've installed a Gen AI course policy. So it's in the course outline. It's communicated on the first day of class. So it's very visible and transparent to all the students. And it clearly, demarcates basically when is Gen AI allowed in the course and when it's prohibited. So we have different types of assessments, and I clearly say, okay, for this assessment, it's allowed under this condition. For this assessment, it's not allowed at all. Things like that. So we try to be as transparent and open with the students, because change is always difficult. You always get resistance to change, but I find that it's always easier to do and accept it when you communicate as clearly as possible. And we keep doing it. It's not just, okay, it's in the course outline, we never talk about it anymore. We keep coming back to it. We try to respond to some of the feedback, especially for those, for example, a couple of students came to me saying oh, we shouldn't be answering those questions. It's not related to our work or things like that. And that's where sometimes, you have to use your educator judgment, just like we teach our nurses to use their nursing judgment in their field. I have to use my educator judgment of sometimes, I believe this will be best for your future. Maybe you disagree with me now. I hope that in a couple of years, you'll realize maybe this was for the better. Because now, especially with a large course like this, like 350 students, it's impossible to please everyone. So you can't try to do that. You need to, I've thought about it. I liked how in your first episode you talked about intentionality. Be intentional, have a good rationale, be transparent, explain it. And then even the most recalcitrant students will come to accept that at some point.
And I think you're also hitting on some major sort of great takeaways too for others where, in addition to the idea of, you're picking a task that's authentic, that's real, that's connected to real world. Students see the relevancy of it. The idea of giving them the practice, dropping one or giving them the practice. That idea, you move them up, like you were able to shove them up on the Bloom's taxonomy, which is always great as much as possible for our students using the rubric to assess them, even keeping old exam questions that you did the old ways and the maybe lower levels along with the new. So you've got a little bit of a opportunity to compare the results. And I think your example of, how do you stop them from using AI to answer the AI question kind of thing about citing course content is an amazing suggestion to faculty, is like trying to ground it within your actual in-person class, so that, AI doesn't have access to what you're actually talking about in class, or at least not yet. But I think all of those are amazing takeaways for anybody thinking about integrating into their class. And I think the designing, you've really gone through the designing AI in very methodically, which is awesome. And I guess one of the questions I also had was, so how are they doing? How are the students doing in the questions, and where do they continue to maybe find difficulty, or how are they doing on that higher level thinking of assessment of the responses?
Yeah. So that was something I was excited to find out, okay, so how are they going to perform on those questions? And they I'm surprisingly happy of how they've performed. So they perform really well. Despite, like you mentioned, the jump up the Bloom's taxonomy, which, credit goes to them. But then I'm also thinking, we probably explained it well or something also, right? Like, so I think it's a teamwork there. So that was nice to see. They still find it challenging. They do admit it's challenging, but then again, that's probably a good sign as well, right? I like to tell them, it's like going to the gym. If you're not sore after going to the gym, you probably wasted a bit of your time, right? So if you want to get some gains, you have to push, what's that zone of proximal development, right? Like we getting there is not the most pleasant thing. The pleasant feeling is after, right? So when you realize what you can do. So getting them to buy in, I have to admit, I feel like I'm a bit privileged in that sense, because as I've mentioned at the beginning, I see the same students over 4 consecutive semesters. So we do get a chance to build a kind of like a trustworthy connection, so that when we talk to the first year students, we tell them, please trust the process, and even talk to the cohort ahead of you 1 year, because usually by the time they get to our second course, they're getting more comfortable. They know us. They see that, even if it's hard, we like to think we're fair, and most of them say we're fair assessors, even though we're challenging. So then it helps, the acceptability of it, I would say. So I think that's really important.
It sounds like it's really rewarding.
I would say yes. There's other parts that are tricky as well. Like for example, when Jasmine asked, what's the course policy? Despite everything being really clear, I still find there's a bit too many evidence of students not respecting, like when we tell them it's really like, if we say like, okay, you can use Gen AI for this, but you can't use it for that. And if you use it for the thing, it's that I'm not being obtuse. Like, I'm not trying to say no to everything. But I do think it's important that you can do things on your own, and then they don't do it. That stings a bit. So yes, there are parts that are rewarding, but and some they're very
always challenges.
They're careless sometimes. Like in some of the answers they put, like, there's still hyperlinks in it. Like it's like, come on, man. It's like, hey. Yeah. So those parts are challenging. But so it's both. That's what makes teaching exciting, I think. Yeah.
Our very last question here, if you have one piece of advice that you would give to another instructor who's thinking about integrating Gen AI into their teaching, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'd say it's a couple of small things, right? I would say, think about beyond the classroom. I think that's really important, even more so nowadays. I teach in a nursing school, so of course we're preparing nurses, which is a professional degree, but we're also preparing citizens of the world in the future. And I think the more you can try to do both together, when you can align the preparing them for a profession and contributing citizens, I think that goes well. So yes, sometimes you might, I think it's not unwarranted to prepare them or to teach a little bit of things that are not maybe directly, or related to what they might do as a nurse. But the thing is that many of my students end up not working in a hospital. They might become working in politics to advocate for public healthcare. They might go into, I had a student go to law school because they wanted to change health laws, right? So I don't know where they end up. So I need to prepare them to a little bit of everything at the same time, right? So I would say that. And then the last thing I would say, really design with intention. If something in your course is not broken, you don't need to fix it with AI. If something you have works, don't just integrate AI for the sake of it. So go with your course. Each instructor should be the master, the expert of their own course. And if you want to integrate AI, try to find a way where integrating AI actually helps either fix a problem or adds value to like the Bloom taxonomy or whatever else they're using to assess. Excellent.
I love both of those. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much, William, for being here with us today. This was great. So many valuable points to share with the community. And thank you to our listeners. Please subscribe to Teach, Learn, Share, and let others know about it. Until next time.
Thank you.